Hi guys, Ace's back with another video for you, and I'm back with some more advanced Tyranid tactics, some advice from the hive mind. And today we're going to talk a little bit generally about chapter approved 2018, but we're also going to delve into a little bit more detail about the Tyranids and what that means for our beloved hive fleets. So before we get started, I just wanted to take the time to really thank everybody that has subscribed to the channel, all my subscribers that have been here all the way through. I really appreciate you guys hanging around, and I apologise that there has been a little bit lacking in content over the last few months. I've been really busy over at Twisted Dice, and you can check out a link to go over to Twisted Dice in the description below. But I'm really busy over there making sure that we produce the best possible content in battle reports for you, and the channel is fastly becoming one of the best battle report channels you can watch. So if you haven't already, make sure you do check them out. But that's taken a lot of time of my busy schedule away from producing content over here. So I wanted to thank everybody that stuck around, and everybody for your kind messages and all the comments on my videos, and all the guys that have come up to me at tournaments and said that I've helped them with previous tactics and going forward, and helped them kind of get better at playing Tyranids and playing generally in 40k. So thank you very much, and a very special thank you goes out to all my Patreons. You know, those guys, absolute bosses. They've stuck with me even though it's been a bit barren on content. The Discord server is more busy than it ever has been before, with new guys starting and chatting about tactics, sharing projects. It's a really cool place to be. And if you want an opportunity to chat with like-minded, Tyranid focused, but also general hobby people, you know, around lists, around colour schemes, painting tips, there's some really great people in there, from beginners to advanced people, and it's becoming a really cool little club. So if you want to jump over to my Patreon, you can do. I will actually put a link below so you can jump over onto Patreon, and just for $1 a month you can support me making videos. It also goes towards me supporting over on Twisted Dice as well, because it's kind of a team effort, and also it means that you can get yourself some cool swag, so you can get yourself some dice for a little bit of a bigger pledge, and even a t-shirt. So, you know, lots of cool stuff over there, and I'm hoping to add more to that as we go through the year, but we'll have to wait and see. But for now, I just want to say a real big thank you to you guys. I can't believe you stuck with me, and I really appreciate it, so thank you very much. Anyway, into today's video. So guys, today what I wanted to do was focus on chapter approved 2018. Now obviously it's 2019 now, but that's the way they kind of date it, so it is the most recent chapter approved. And you know, I've got some real up-to-date tech for you guys. So I've just finished running the Last Chance Open, so that's a 100-man grand tournament, a major in the UK. So I've had a really good idea of what the meta's looking like after, and that's the biggest event that we've had post chapter approved. So I've got all the results from that, and I've watched it being a TO and be able to stand back and look at the tables to see how the meta has changed, to see how that is, you know, how it's adapted to those new points and what's happening there. So it's given me a really good idea, and I can kind of share with you what's likely to be hot and what's likely to be not. So that's kind of very general, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But then after that, we will focus on Tyranids in chapter approved. What's changed for the hive fleet, you know, and what is it that we need to be looking at now to adapting our forces for the coming future until we get future changes. So the general meta, and this is the interesting thing, and actually I can cover this relatively quickly, because the interesting thing is actually the meta really hasn't changed. So nothing dramatically has changed post the chapter approved, and the reason why that is because what Games Workshop have done is they've tried to make some of the less used units a little bit more prevalent. They've tried to make them so they can lift them up slightly, and that will have a slight impact in areas, but predominantly what it has meant is because obviously a lot of the strong units just stayed the same, or maybe you got some fraction increases, it's meant that actually those have just stayed at the top because those units were so powerful. They are still very relevant, so don't expect to see dramatic changes because most things have stayed the same. Dark Elder are still very strong. That Vect stratagem, even with the increase in CPs, is very prevalent, and expect a lot of Elder armies to have that. They'll try and stop you using some of your toys. The Castellan Knight is still incredibly strong. Obviously no points increase for it, just the FAQ changes to CPs obviously affected it, but it is still prevalent on those top tables, so we still are going to have to deal with that. That particularly affects Tyranids, that we'll go on and talk about in a bit, but generally you just need to be able to plan for the Castellan. Particularly, you can plan for all knights, but the Castellan in particular, because if you can't be prepared for it and you're not able to play it in a way, you're going to find you come unstuck at those top tables, so definitely don't forget about that. And Ynnari still very prevalent. Those crafty Eldar are still going to be at the top of most tournaments, and doing their business, so definitely something that again we need to prepare for because that has not changed. So I think Deathwatch, with the changes to some of the points for the Space Marines, we should see a little bit more potentially of them mixed in with some Imperium stuff. You're going to see a little bit more of that. They're very good. But the big change, not post chapter approved, but recently, is the emerging menace that is the Orcs, and they are going to put a big impact on everybody because what they do is they bring Horde and they bring it effectively, but they also shoot incredibly well and they also perform outstandingly in the assault phase. So whatever army you're taking, you need to be able to prepare for the Orcs. They are coming and they are big news, so definitely one to be concerned about. The Chaos Forces, they're still going to be heavily dependent on your sorcerers in the Thousand Suns, your Demon Princes, your Araman, he's going to be very important, and the Zangors still being incredibly strong and powerful, so they're not going to go anywhere. And Cultists, even with their points increase, yes, you might be not quite as many of them as you see around, obviously, but I still think you need to be able to prepare for Horde Chaos as well, because it's not really changing. So there's a few Forge World units that have changed slightly. Predominantly the big one to look at would be the Taldar Supremacy suit. Again, it's a great anti-knight unit. It will delete knights particularly effectively because it has macro weapons. It's still very expensive points wise, but kitting it out with drones and a little bit of extra support, and it can work. So again, something to definitely be aware of, but I don't necessarily expect to see it at the top tables. And the big Necron Construct, again another unit that's come through very recently and is very powerful. It's a good answer to knights. It can deal with Horde a little bit. It's still probably a tad expensive to be truly top tier, but I would not be surprised to see quite a few of them knocking around in Necron armies. They are definitely one of their best units now, so expect to see them. So they're in a very quick overview of the top performing and the list really to look out for. They're what you need to think about, so you need to take a lot of that into consideration when you're building your army, be it Tyranid or anything else. Definitely take into account those factors, and don't worry too much about potentially the changes in points in a lot of units, because yes, there are some great Primaris units that are now a bit more reasonably pointed, but they're still not going to be top of the tier. They're not going to be the meta armies or lists. So the same sort of lists that we see prior are definitely going to be the ones to watch, with the exception of the new Orc Menace. So going into Tyranids, and obviously we always like to focus on Tyranids in this channel. It is my favourite, my beloved hive fleets, and you're here probably to look at how we've changed. And rather than me go through points specifically, because now there's been a long time since chapter approved, you've all probably got your books, so we don't need to go through points in particular, but I want to talk about how it has changed, how the meta is currently changing and dealing with Tyranids, and how chapter approved has affected our Tyranid hive fleets. And noticeably, probably one of our biggest two changes are to the Broodlord and to the Swarm Lord, and actually to a different extent the Neurophrope has also seen a big change, and they're probably our biggest changes in chapter approved and the ones that will affect our lists the most. And I want to cover them all individually and talk a little bit about them and how they will affect your lists. So let's start off with the negative, and that is the Neurophrope. Now the Neurophrope was our go-to cheap HQ. It was also very effective at handing out smites because it could re-roll those ones. It was a great unit, had a good invuln save, could sit at the back, had enough wounds to be pretty solid, difficult to deal with. Generally a really all-round great unit. You could take it in any hive fleet and it didn't really matter, so it was just a great unit, and it padded out majority of our battalions and brigades. Now it's got quite a significant points increase. Now that points increase, if we're being honest, is probably fair for what that unit can do for us. But it's definitely something to consider because it is going to make your list slightly bit more expensive and making us think, do we want to take that as necessarily the go-to HQ? Is there something else to look at? And definitely worth considering, because a lot of the time it didn't do very much. It would just sit at the back, make sure that you had synapse for your back artillery and shooting units to make sure they were kept in line, and also keep your potentially your warlord or your HQ unit nice and safe at the back of the board. So now that unit has got that a little bit more expensive. We have to understand and we have to make a decision whether that's still worthwhile, whether that's still worth paying those points for. So that's the Neurophrope, and what would I say about it? So the Neurophrope I still think is probably your best HQ. It's now not your cheapest. Your cheapest goes to the Tyranid Prime. And the Tyranid Prime has that ability to buff warriors. It's obviously quite a bit better in combat. It's a little bit better all-arounder, but it doesn't have the psychic support. It doesn't have the 3+ invulnerable save. It doesn't synergize with your other Zoanthropes. And it's an interesting unit. Something to consider if you're trying to keep yourself a little bit cheaper, but probably the Neurophrope's still the one you'd go for. That additional smite is very handy with that reroll ones. So I don't think we necessarily go with the Prime, but it's definitely something to consider if you are looking to save some points. And obviously with war gear, you're going to find that they equal themselves out pretty quick. So the next unit to talk about will be the mighty Broodlord. Now the Broodlord was already a decent unit, but it was incredibly overpointed. The decision that you've always got to make with a Broodlord is it worth taking a Broodlord or is it worth taking more Gene Stealers? And that's always quite a difficult choice, because you're going to find that when you actually math it out, that generally even giving those Gene Stealers the better to hit roll, you tend to find you're going to get more use and more mileage out of just more Gene Stealers. So it's definitely, it's made the decision more interesting, and I think it's something that you can definitely now consider, and actually you can make Broodlords work quite well. They are incredibly powerful in combat. Their issue has always been the fact that they're not particularly resilient, so once they get hit back, they generally die pretty quickly. You know, they have an invuln, but it's not resilient enough, and they go down pretty quick. But I do buff your Gene Stealers. So do I think it's worth taking them? Well, look, you know, if you're taking 3 units of Gene Stealers, you know, you do have that bonus to get them all hitting on 2s, and I think it's definitely something that's worth playing around with. You know, it's going to give you some strength and def, and it's definitely something worth playing around with and giving it a go and seeing whether it suits your playstyle to have that guy up there and doing his business. It's definitely something that isn't going to be a bad shout. It's going to give you a different sort of angle to your army. It does give you a psychic power, and it does give you the ability to keep those gene stealers even more efficient themselves. So maybe with 3 units with an incredibly heavy Tyranid list and 3 maxed out units of gene stealers, maybe it's worth, you know, spending those few extra points and upgrading your Neurothroat to a Broodlord. Give it a go. Let me know how you get on. I still have my doubts whether it's the most efficient way to run, but definitely worth a try. They're a solid unit, and I think you definitely could find a place for them in a competitive Tyranid army. So the next big change is the Swarmlord, and this one is amazing for us. The Swarmlord has, over the past few months, become more and more prevalent in Tyranid lists after the demise of the mass Flyrants. Because now you've got the ability to take the Swarmlord, you know, he does give those gene stealers that second springboard, as well as whether it be Hormagaunts, or, you know, even he uses himself as a, you know, a scud missile as such, firing himself into the midst of combat and doing some big damage. He's a great unit. He is a very, very solid choice. Again, you've got psychic power support. He's very good in combat, having that free up invuln. He can hang around, not bad with the wounds, so he can stick about. He does suffer from the Castellan factor that we spoke about earlier, and the fact of if you can't hide the guy, he's in a bit of trouble. And this is a bit of a modelling tip for you. So the Swarmlord is a relatively small model. Now I've made my Swarmlord look super cool, dynamic and big. Don't do that. If you want to play this guy competitively, keep him as small footprint as you possibly can, because you want to hide this guy. Any board that is worth its weight in gold will now be packing a fair bit of line of sight blocking terrain, and actually you should find it relatively easy to hide your Swarmlord effectively and use him in the right way. That's going to be really important for you. So, but don't give your opponent extra chances and make him really dynamic. So as much as that might suck, because just the standard Hive Tyrant is not a particularly dynamic model, you want your Swarmlord to look really menacing, big, and you know, fantastic, because that's the fluff. A Swarmlord is meant to be much bigger than a Hive Tyrant, but the reality is the model is technically not. So use the advantage of the model and model him in his normal standard pose, so you can grab some cover. You'll find it very, very useful in the game. And you know, if you've been using a Swarmlord, you know, and actually maybe it's time to buy another one. Keep your fancy, amazing, dynamic one on your shelf, or bring him out for fluffy narrative games because he looks cool, exactly the same as mine. But if I was going to take him to a tournament right now, I would definitely be looking at minimalising his footprint, well, not his footprint so much, but the size of the model, by making sure that he is the standard size, so I can grab that cover that you will find extremely important. So a little bit of a modelling tip there, but definitely one to consider, because the Swarmlord is a bit of a go-to. With a 50-point drop, he is a must-take for most Tyranid armies, and I cannot advise high enough for you to take him in your army. He is good in any high fleet. He is just a solid linchpin of your army. He gives you a great synaptic distance, so you can keep your guys in check. He's great in combat, and with that hive commander ability to slingshot your gene stealers into combat, you really can't go wrong without the Swarmlord. So definitely start to look at getting him back in your army at that points drop. I can't advise it high enough. And they're the big changes. Now there are some like some small changes in there. The majority of them are big bugs, and I'm afraid, guys, and this makes my heart bleed a little bit, and it is saddening. But the big bugs are still just not good enough. Not in a competitive meta that has the big guys so prevalent still. So knights, particularly the Castellan, you've got things like the Talnar coming back into place. You've got the big Necron spiders that I spoke about previously. They are just going to delete your big bugs so quickly, because they do not have invulnerable saves. And without invulnerable saves, those guys are going down really, really quick. So as much as I love them and they are the coolest thing ever, and don't stop playing them in your narrative and fun games with your buddies, if you want to take a competitive Tyranid list, the likes of your Trigons, your Trigon Primes, your Demicherons, your Toxicrenes, your Maliceptor. Maliceptor's a bit different because he does have an invulnerable save, but still, don't take him. Your Tyrannofexes, even your Exocrines. Generally, I'm going to tell you guys, I'd stay clear of them in a competitive meta because they are just going to die too quickly and you are not going to get your points worth. So even with those points decreases, until we start to see the big guys that can just elite other big guys, you know, off the table, it's not a place for your big bugs in a competitive environment. If you differ and you believe that actually, you know, the Tyrannofex is a must-have, you've got to have them in all your lists, then let me know. I'll be really interested to kind of hear your thoughts. But for me, when I've done my testing, those big bugs just do not stick it at the top tables. They die too quickly. So that's kind of my advice around that. So the exciting thing is all my previous videos around Tyranids, around Hive Guard, around Flying Hive Tyrants, yeah, around troops choices is all super relevant because all those army lists, all those tactics, all those units are still very much your best units in the Tyranid Codex. They're your go-tos, they're the ones you want to be looking at. They are still the best units out there. And the great thing is with the points deduction to the Swarm Lord, your armies, your top tier armies have probably got a little bit cheaper, even with the Neurothrope increase. You know, you've got some options there. So definitely all to play for really as we come out of chapter approved. I would say, just talking about chapter approved, I think we're going to see more and more of this going away from the second roll off and the first army that's down gets a +1, all that type of thing, and we're going to go much more to that old style of you deploy your whole army, I deploy my whole army, you go first and we roll off for it. When that becomes the case and it becomes more prevalent, which is what I think will happen, the amount of units you get is not going to be a problem, which helps us Tyranid players because lots of units is really what we thrive on and what we do really well. So what are some little kind of some units to think about? So the Mucalid, excuse me as I grab my cup of tea before it gets cold, the Forge World Mucalid things, I can never get the names right, they all sound the same. They're now a little bit more feasible, I would say definitely worth looking at as a great kind of disruption unit, quite a lot of fun, you can have some little tricks with them. I think the Lictors now as a very cheap and cheerful distraction unit have a place. The Pyrovores, I think there's some play with dropping those guys or them coming up for a tunnel or dropping them in a pod. I think you can have some fun with those guys as well. So there's some little outliers, so definitely you could potentially get some of them in some kind of borderline competitive lists and definitely get some mileage from them. So give those units a go and see how they get on, and if you really kind of think you're having a lot of fun with them and you think that's worth shouting about, let me know as well and I'll do some more in-depth tactical videos on those units. So hopefully that has been a lot of help for you. What I would say is it's a tough road for us at the moment, guys. Orcs pretty much do what Tyranids do but better, which means we have got a tough road out there. I've gone against Orcs a couple of times with my Tyranids, once on Twisted Dice and once in a practice game. I've also played Orcs now against Tyranids as well, and I would say that it is tough for the Tyranids. Orcs do pretty much what Tyranids do but a little bit better, so that's tough. So what I would say is practice. There is no exception for you know, actually a good general can overcome the odds, and we definitely have all the tools within the Tyranid army to overcome the Orc menace, and also knights. So knights are again a big challenge. We don't have a lot that deals with knights particularly well, and again the answer to that is playing the mission, be crafty, use the tools at your disposal, and you can again overcome the knights, but it is not easy. And you need to be smart and you need to be quick and you need to be clever. But these are the things that we need to face into, and these are the things that we need to deal with. I'm more than happy to do the how to beat videos again, so if that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments. But hopefully in all, guys, that gives you something to go on, that gives you a little bit of help and a little bit of overview of where Tyranids are and where the meta is currently coming out of chapter approved. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do put a thumbs up, give us a comment, give us a like, and if you haven't subbed already, please do sub to the channel. And until the next video, thanks guys, I'll see you soon. Bye for now.